Please welcome Brother Anas.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق أجمعين. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, friends, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's indeed a pleasure to be addressing this audience at this Islam Expo on the final day of what has proven to be a magnificent event. I'm proud to be one of the directors of Islam Expo and to see the mere thought and dream that we had something like three and a half years ago coming to this makes one feel extremely very, very humble, to say the very least, and thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that things have come as they have. And therefore I'd like to congratulate everyone who has been part of making Islam Expo what it has been, including yourselves obviously, because without the turnout, without the audience, without the interaction, without the kind of engagement that we have had over the past 3 days and hopefully throughout today, this wouldn't have been the kind of event that has proven this kind of success. Now the title of this particular seminar is British Muslims and Political Participation. This, if we were talking about Muslim political participation something like maybe 10 years ago, we would be talking about a totally alien subject, a subject that is far from the minds and concerns and priorities of most Muslims, whether they be individuals or organizations. In fact, I recall I was studying for my A-levels in Manchester in the mid-80s, when I recall that someone came to the university and spoke to the Muslim population at the place where I was studying, at a college then, and we had a sizable Muslim population. And the thing that he spoke about was how important it was for those of us looking forward to university careers to think and to consider about entering certain fields and certain disciplines that would allow us then to enter within the realms of political life, or what he called at the time public life. And politics was part of it, whether it be politics, media, shaping public opinion or the such. And at the time, there was extremely few who understood, appreciated what this man came to speak about. It was a totally alien issue. And this was merely 20 years ago. But now, the issue of the political participation of Muslims is something which I feel is no longer that alien. In fact, to have this particular issue at an event like this being discussed as we are doing is a sign that it has become one of the items on the priority list of Muslims today. And that's a sign of incredible progress. And this progress, we must say, is a sign of progress on a number of fields. Firstly, of course, on the field or on the part of the Muslim community itself. To have come to this decision and to make political participation, and if we like to broaden the term and say public participation and public engagement, not just engagement through mere feedback or mere voting, which also a few years ago was something which we were still discussing whether it was allowable, permissible or otherwise, or futile or fertile. We were discussing this. And we have come a great deal so that now this is no longer an issue. It's an issue that we all agree, or mostly agree, that it is something which lies at the top of our priority list, or somewhere thereabouts. It is also a sign that our society has also progressed to the extent whereby we can actually achieve and attain that particular potential. And we have to recognize that. And here I come back to a fundamental of Islamic religion and faith. And that is that when I am offered a blessing or a bounty by Allah Almighty, I am therefore held accountable for what I did, how I utilized it, how I used it to the full for the benefit of all those around me. And this is a bounty, the fact that we live in a country, in the midst of a society that allows us the freedom, that allows us the realization of our dreams and aspirations is something which is a bounty of Allah. Believe me, I travel frequently to Western European countries, and without naming names, because I know that we have guests from across Europe, and I don't want to have anyone feeling as though they have been criticized, but I have traveled to a number of European countries, particularly Western European countries. And I have interacted with either Muslim communities there, leading organizations, or even with political or media circles in those countries. There is nothing that comes even remote to the situation that we have here in Britain. Not even close. Not even close. Either on the Muslim side, in terms of realization of the kind of importance of this, or if they do realize the importance of this, the realization of the mechanism in how they can achieve it, or in terms of society at large, whether it be from the governmental level, to media, to think tanks, to academic organizations, to training centers or the such, all helping the Muslim community realize that particular dream. And therefore, to be in Britain today, to be a British Muslim in Britain today, is indeed, in my belief, an extremely privileged status, and a very, very privileged position to be in. And that puts upon us as a Muslim community an added onus and an added responsibility. I believe that the realization of the importance of this on behalf of the Muslim community has, of course, been aided and has been promoted by events that have been happening throughout our context, whether it be domestically, locally, nationally, or even abroad. And I think that for the Muslim community, and particularly the young Muslims today, to arrive at the decision that it is now time to stop merely watching the news and tut-tutting about how bad things are, whether they be at home or abroad. It is now time to actually go and do something about it. And that is an extreme leap, a very, very radical and extremely important historical turning point in which I think many years, possibly even decades down the line, we will come back to address and assess our progress, and we will find that that particular decision of the Muslim community in Britain to actually engage fully, positively, constructively within public life, and particularly within politics and media, within this particular moment of time when Muslims were pressurized like no other time, I think we will see that as a major turning point in our existence and in our history. And it's something that we have had the fortune, by the grace of Allah, to have lived through and seen, and possibly even being part of. It is vital that whilst I'm here celebrating the achievements that we have made over the past few years, to also recognize the difficulties and the challenges that we have faced. And we have faced immense difficulties and immense challenges. This hasn't come easy. This trip, this journey to arrive at where we are today has by no means been an easy trip or an easy venture. It's been riddled with difficulties. Some of those difficulties from within the Muslim community, trying to overcome certain traditions, certain embedded, intrinsic beliefs that somehow Muslims should not be part of the political structure, should not be part of the political system. That in itself was a great, great hurdle. And for many months, possibly even years, myself and my co-panelists that you will hear from today fought tooth and nail against Muslims, our brothers and sisters, who attacked, criticized, even accused, because we saw that this was the way to go. And let no one be fooled. The importance of this is not just because we, the Muslim community, have agendas to fulfill or to achieve. That may be true, and there is no fault or nothing wrong with that. But there is also an incredible important factor to the Muslim community having a consensus that being engaged and engulfed in this political process is vital. Because basically, when you open the doors to public participation of the young, you provide to them channels positive, constructive channels of venting their frustrations, their angers. The will to change. You know how when we were young, well at least I know, when I was in my teens, and I used to think about what I wanted to be, one of the things I wanted to do was to change the world. Very naive, very simplistic. But those are dreams that we carry with us. And unfortunately, it seems that most human beings go through life, and that dream becomes more distant potential, until you become almost cynical that it is not possible to change the world. And therefore we have, you know, a generation throughout society, Muslims and otherwise, that think, no, it's a waste of time. And that's where we come to the apathy, to the problem of apathy. Why people are just basically not voting, not getting involved, not joining political parties. They don't believe in politicians, they don't believe in decision makers, simply because their dreams, which they heralded, which they had when they were young, have never been realized. In fact, they've never even seen the windows for them to be realized. Now the problem is that while some may choose, in the midst of apathy, to sit at home and not to go to the ballot boxes and not to join and not to take part, there is also another section of people that will seek other venues to create change. And that is where the problem lies. And here I'm not talking just about the Muslim community, because I've been told more times, you know, than I care to count, that I seem to sometimes come too heavy down on the Muslim community. I think that the issue of extremism and terrorism is not something which is exclusive to Muslims or to Islam. In fact, it is further away from Islam and Muslims than most, I would suggest. When I talk about extremism in our midst, I do not mean Islamic extremism, as it has been labelled and branded today. And I think that's extremely unfortunate and a very, very dangerous discourse. When I talk about extremism, I also talk about the far-right elements, the very dangerous elements in our society, that now carry political banners, such as the BNP and others, within politics, within media, within social groups, that are now fanning the flames, literally, to basically promote the sense of racism and Islamophobia that we have in our midst today. Today we have a problem in our society, and that is we have two, I think, minute margins in our society. Whether they be the extremists on the Muslim side or the extremists on the non-Muslim side, both of whom are promoting one idea. And it's funny that it's an identical idea. And that idea is, there is no hope with politics. There is no hope in creating or effecting change through the means that we have today. They are both saying that. But it is up to the mass majority of those in the middle to prove them wrong. And I think that the Muslim community over the previous years have, through their political participation, in whatever, and sometimes I'm often asked, which party should I join? That is not the issue. In fact, I do not really care that much. I'm a member of Respect, everyone knows that. But I don't mind if you are more inclined to join the Lib Dems, or Labour, or the Conservatives. We may have a discussion about why you have chosen that. We may do that. But I don't mind. Go out and do something. That is our message to the young. And I think that organisations such as the Muslim Association in Britain and others have been at the pinnacle of this campaign to promote political engagement and to promote the fact that we can and we will effect change out of our religious and citizenship duties, because as Muslims we believe that we become better British citizens. We can effect change through those channels. And those are the channels we have to emphasize on. We have to continue to talk, we have to continue to dialogue, we have to continue to lobby and to campaign, to send letters and to engage, to join political parties, to join all sorts of social movements. And I think it's imperative that we also show our success stories. And let me not, make any kind of, or create any kind of confusion. Some think that it is how many members of parliament we have that carry the label of Muslim that counts. To me, that is next to zero in terms of relevance. It does not matter whether I have one Muslim MP or whether I have 60 Muslim MPs. It does not matter. Yes, there are concerns when it comes to matters of representation and as such, and society and breakdown of our communities and how they are represented well or otherwise. But the thing is that, unfortunately, I have today, I'm told constantly that I have members of parliament, and I only wish that Sadiq Khan didn't have his urgent family commitment today so that he can join us. We have today one or two at least Muslim MPs that I am constantly harangued and told, you have Muslim MPs in the House of Parliament on your behalf representing you. But to be honest, they are harming me far more than people can imagine. They are not representing the best interests of the Muslim community. And that is an incredible problem. And I have non-Muslim MPs, Christians, Jews, atheists, people of all denominations, who are serving my best interests, and I believe that there is no fragmentation between the interests of the Muslim community and wider society. They are serving those interests far greater, far better than the Muslim MP. It is not a matter of numbers. It is not a matter of quantity. It is not my concern to create some sort of revolution within the main political parties to have a huge number of Muslims within each. That is irrelevant if those Muslims do not realize their civic duties as well as their religious duties. It is to me irrelevant. And I will be the weaker for it, because I'll be told that I have people representing me, yet in reality they do not. So, within the very few seconds that I have left, I think that generally speaking, the adventure that we have had over the past few years, and the kind of realization of the Muslim community, of the importance and the significance of coming to the fore, becoming fully engaged in public life on all levels, including the political, is something that we have to be extremely proud of, appreciative of, and also in a state of realization of how we can build on this for a better and more constructive future. It is also imperative that we as a community realize that, in fact, although many may be drumming the differences between ourselves and others, in reality, we do not have that much difference with our wider society. In fact, I would suggest, and I haven't done any kind of academic study here, I would suggest we have more than 80 to 85% of our issues, concerns, and interests which link 100% with the interests and best wishes and those and aspirations of anyone throughout the wider community. When I talk, and this I'm going to finish on, Chair, when I talk about Palestine, when I talk about Iraq, when I talk about Afghanistan, people say, well, why do you keep on talking about foreign issues? These are not foreign issues, my friends. These are not foreign issues, and this is a message to my Muslim friends. I am an Iraqi. I was born in Iraq. I'm proud that both my parents are Iraqi. I'm also British because this is where I spent my entire life. This is my country. When I speak about Iraq and defend Iraq, it's because I'm a British citizen and I love this country. It's because I do not want my country, the finest of our boys and girls, being sent halfway across the world in order to kill and deal unjustly with other people. That is why I do not want Britain to get involved in Iraq. We as Muslims view these issues. We view the issue of Palestine, of Afghanistan, of Kashmir and the such as just humane issues. We as Muslims also believe in the repercussion or the retribution or the consequence of our actions. That when I do something, it will have an effect. If I deal with someone unjustly today, I will be dealt with unjustly tomorrow. That is a fact of life, and I believe in that. And therefore, I do not want something bad to happen to this country or its people. And that is why I do not want it to do something bad to other people. I wanted to act morally. I wanted to act ethically. I wanted to act in a spirit of humanity and justice and equality and fairness, not just here, but anywhere around the world. That is where my participation in the political process comes. Because I want to drag politics today from the state of apathy in which everyone hates the name of a politician, the face of a politician. People have become cynical of the whole process. Some have chosen to sit at home and do nothing, and there's a minute proportion of society who have chosen to effect change through other means. We have to win over the morality and ethics of our political process. We have to win people back to the table of dialogue, speaking, meeting, debating, even agreeing to disagree, but we have to bring people to that table, kicking and screaming. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, I don't have much time to go through each person's speech, and also you'll be glad not to hear my voice anyway. That brings me to the next speaker, great sister, Sister Salma, who I've known for many years really, and she has worked very, very hard. Again, as Anas mentioned, not just for Muslims, but for the British society, which encompasses Muslims and all the other colours and faiths that that includes. So please welcome Brother Sister Salma, please.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. I'm going to talk to you today unashamedly as a respect counsellor, as a woman, as a British citizen, and as a human being. This title, the political participation of British Muslims. Let's be clear about something. Muslims have been participating politically in Britain for many years. We all voted Labour for many years. It's not true that we haven't been part of the political process. But what is new is that many of us have started to question the efficacy. Do we actually bring about any real change by participating politically? And I have to say that for a long time I was cynical. I wasn't somebody who would have thought about getting into politics because I didn't like politics. And the irony in my life now is that somebody who's disliked politics, I've become a politician, but it's for the same reason. It's because I don't like the current state of politics in Britain today. And you know, when I hear Tony Blair say just this week that Muslims have no legitimate grievance, that we are all extremists if we say there is a legitimate grievance, it makes me think even more how Muslims need to be political. Because what is happening now is that the line between even those of us who talk about the injustices, and we say there is a legitimate right to talk about these things, and we say it's wrong for people to blow themselves and other people up, like what happened on 7/7. What Tony Blair is saying is that people like me, and I think the majority of people sitting here, who acknowledge injustices are wrong in even saying that. And we are all now in the same camp as those people like Sadiq Khan and Tanweer who chose to blow themselves and other people up. I'm choosing to talk about this as a starting point because what is happening in Britain is that the scope for politics is becoming squeezed out. At the very time that the need for politics is greater than ever. And not just about foreign policy, but I'll come back to that when we talk about some of this foreign policy stuff. Because Muslims up to now, we've kind of fractured along. We're not one body. It's nice in theory to think that we are. But the fact is, we're different. We have different ethnicities, we have different viewpoints. And from where I'm standing, after 9/11, we had three kinds of responses from the Muslim community. One, paralysis. These awful things happened, we're all being scrutinised, let's get our heads down, be quiet, and maybe they leave us alone. Becoming more passive out of a sense of fear and helplessness. And I would say the majority of people fell into that initially. Then the second lot of people, seeing what had happened, seeing that these terrorist attacks happened in 9/11, but seeing the discourse around it as if all Muslims are somehow to blame, becoming even more angry, saying, well, there's been Palestine, there's been Kashmir, there's been Chechnya, all these people have been killed all these years and we haven't bothered, and now we're all supposed to be mourning for these people. Yes, we mourn for them, but you know what? This was coming to you. That's how some Muslims felt. We have to acknowledge that. And some of these Muslims felt, it's always going to be them and us. No matter what you do as Muslims, they'll never accept you, they're always going to hate you, and we're always going to be separate. So there's no point in talking to these people, no point in becoming part of the political process. In fact, it's haram, because they're the kuffar, the disbelievers, and we are the believers, the mu'min, the Muslims, and the pathway to change is only through this clash. That's one group of people. And I have to say, there were a small group of people, but very vocal and very media friendly, in the sense that when somebody speaks like that, they will attract attention and their views will get a platform. So we do have some of those people in our midst. And then there was another group of people who thought, we don't like what's happened in 9/11, we are outraged, innocent people have been killed, but at the same time, we're not surprised, because there has been injustice, and why should we feel apologetic or be censored in speaking out about that injustice? And now that my country, speaking as a British person, is going to war in Afghanistan, going back to that time, how is that going to solve the original injustices, and how is that going to stop other terrorist attacks happening in the West if we don't talk about it? And I fell into that third camp. And I didn't know many people who fell into that third camp to start with, I'll be honest, because more people in the first camp being very scared. And I live next door to my parents still. My own father was saying, Salma, don't speak up, don't talk about the politics, don't talk about context, because they'll think that you're with Osama bin Laden, because that's what we've been told. Are you British, or are you Muslim? Are you with us, or are you against us? We were not given this option of saying that we are against all attacks of innocent people, whether they're in the West or in the East, whether it's state-sponsored terrorism or individuals or groups, whatever their religious or political background. And it was really hard to hear that voice. And since this week, I feel we're going back to that place, but it's becoming harder and harder to point out these realities. But a journey was begun, and I began my political journey then. And it was very much fostered when I met non-Muslims who stood up and were equally passionate about Palestine, about Afghanistan, about what was happening to people abroad as well as people here. And it did make me think about, where am I standing here as a Muslim? Yes, I believe stand up for justice, even if it goes against yourself. That's what the Quran says. But the question is, what's the best route? And living in Britain, given our political processes, what choices do we have? And what's the most efficient way of bringing about a real and lasting change? And the conclusion that I got to, and it was through the experience of being part of the anti-war movement initially, and seeing in reality, not just in words, because we hear these politically correct terms, don't we, how we've all got a lot in common, and how we're all human beings, but you know, when you're sitting there at home watching the TV day in, day out, and just seeing a one-sided argument, it's not easy not to feel angry, and not to feel isolated, and not to feel like nobody really wants to know where you're coming from, and that you're not being labelled. But being part of the anti-war movement, seeing how actually we were a minority, and the majority were non-Muslims coming out being passionate about justice, it did give me that hope. And it did, in a practical way, make me see about how we do enact our humanity in a united way. And it's political. People say, no, you can't be political. And actually, very political marching. And it's a good thing. And I'm coming back now to mainstream parties. Right now, the Liberal Democrat Party claims to be an anti-war party. Good. I'm glad. But I tell you this, if people had not marched, had not been courageous enough to go outside of the mainstream at that point in time, we would never have reached the point today where being an anti-war person is a completely normal thing. Now we have a mainstream party giving this anti-war credentials. I see some people shaking their heads. I tell you this, I was part of organising those demonstrations. There were 13 national demonstrations. I was talking to the leader of the Lib Dems in my own home city, and he said there's no point. We're not never going to be bigger than the Countryside Alliance where 400,000 people marched. And yet, when 2 million people came out, we saw a change in the official policy. On the last demonstration in 2003, we had a call from Charles Kennedy saying, can I come to your platform? He said, yes, anybody's anti-war is welcome. I'm just using that as an example, not just to have a bash at the Lib Dems. The point being that sometimes real change in the mainstream happens because people are prepared to act outside of it. When I stand here as a Respect Party councillor, believe it would have been easier to go with the mainstream in some senses. I chose it because I didn't see people speaking up because there's a consensus now for privatisation, for the wars abroad between our main parties in England right now. So for me, the challenge as a Muslim wasn't, well, how do I become just another Muslim representative? How do we be the voice for the voiceless, whoever they are, Muslim or non-Muslim? And we do have a democratic deficit right here in what people call the mother of democracy in England right now. And yes, we are among some of the most powerful group in the world, those who feel helpless. Our government has a big say in how the world is run and how other people's lives are affected. And if we as citizens don't participate in that process, I feel responsible. I do. If my government, even if I haven't elected them, if I haven't done all I can to stop them being elected, I still feel accountable. So I think we do need a revival of citizenship across the board, not just about Muslims. And I feel that when we put justice and ethics at the heart of a political project, then we have to win in the long term. Any significant rights gained in this country, whether it's women's rights, whether it's workers' rights, whether it's environmental rights, whether it's equal opportunities, wasn't because a mainstream politician woke up one day and said, right chaps, we're going to push this one through. It's because ordinary people struggled for decades. And yes, we want short-term solutions. Believe me, I want this thing sorted by tomorrow. And yes, it's not as glamorous, as glorious, as maybe some of our young men have decided to go and blow themselves up, because they haven't got the patience to do the long struggle, because they haven't got the hope that maybe people will be standing alongside them. And I would really love to say to people like Sadiq Khan, what did you think you were going to achieve? Did you think that you were going to help your brothers and sisters in Palestine and Iraq by killing innocent people here? Your anger and your rage, whilst you may have thought it was about oppression abroad, became ultimately a selfish act of rage. And you've only made things worse, not better. And we have to be really real about this. At the same time as knowing that only a few people do follow that path. And at the same time, I feel angry and I'm always told, well, you've got to stop these extremists. Well, I think I've also got to stop extremists like Tony Blair. Just because we have... they wear smart suits and, you know, they get all the coverage, doesn't make them any less inhuman and brutal than those people who carry out terrorist attacks. In fact, if anything, they do it from afar and get other people to do their dirty work for them. And as we sit here in our angst, still people are dying every day because of our policies, because of our government, of people like Tony Blair. And what are we going to do to stop that? We cannot say that we are not part of the problem if we do not choose to be part of the solution. So just to summarise, I'm conscious of get my running right here. I've chosen, in one sense, to stand outside the mainstream, not because I don't want to be in the mainstream or just because I want to have some kind of self-righteous, angry response. No. It's a strategy. It's saying if the mainstream isn't going to initiate it, then we have to be part of the pressure to make sure they do. And we have seen already how people become more and more confident about carrying by saying arguments which even a few years ago they would have been afraid to say. And so I'm proud to be on the margins at times, because it's the margins that start and the centre where it will end up. And I'll be confident when history looks back, it won't be Tony Blair who will be remembered for being something positive in the world. Just like when Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, they were called extremists at their time, but who remembers a white president now? Who was right? Them, or mainstream America at that time? Surely it's Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And the same way, the people like you and me who remembered in history for helping to try to bring that peace in the world, not our mainstream politicians right now. I'll just end with one last thing. If we really want peace, we have to have justice. And there can be no justice while we have inequality. So we have to have equality, justice, then we can have peace. Thank you very much.
sort of workers. Our next speaker, really, although he's very popular on the Palestinian issue, but his background, academic background otherwise, and is in Islamic political thought. He has an Institute of Islamic Political Thought, which he's been running for over a decade at least now, and he does seminars in this issue, so he's very well versed. So if you could please welcome Brother Azam.
You can guess, of course, very clearly that I was called for an emergency because some of our speakers haven't turned up. But I seize this opportunity to try and explain to you why some Muslims refuse to accept the notion of power sharing or participation in politics. This is the sort of work I've been involved in for the past 15 years in academic research. If we think of two models of political order, the Islamic model in inverted commas and a Western Christian model again in inverted commas, they are opposite models in terms of history. The Islamic model starts from a point of perfection in the minds of Muslims. The ideal point in our history was the beginning. The Prophet, peace be upon him, ﷺ, established a state in Medina, and his companions after him continued in his tradition and established and ruled the community in what we refer to today as the rightly guided caliphate. And then from that moment onwards, that model started undergoing transformation, started undergoing change to the worst, not to the best, to the worst, until about a couple of centuries ago, it entered into a state of total decay, and then it collapsed altogether. Now, the opposite model, the Christian Western model, is one that started very badly. Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, never established a political order. He was conspired against. The Christians believe he was crucified. We, the Muslims, believe he was raised somehow. It doesn't matter. But what really matters is that Christianity from early history was used and abused by political powers in order to impose hegemony on human communities. Now, when we Muslims return to our history, we always see a very bright picture, the best of all pictures. A picture of a caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab, sleeping under the tree, feeling confident, feeling safe, peaceful, because he ruled justly and there were no grievances against him in the community, so everybody was happy. Ruler was happy, the ruled were happy. The concept of shura was fully implemented, which meant that the community was involved in the running of the affairs, of its own affairs, and the ruler had authority and derived mandate from Sharia, which is the law, and therefore there was a rule of law, and everybody was equal under the law. Now, what happened in the West, in the Western Christian tradition, is that the people had to struggle for their freedom. It took so many centuries of struggle until we ended up with the Enlightenment and then the modern age of liberal democracy, which to the Western people is the best achievement of their society ever. And therefore, if somebody speaks against democracy, that's an insult to the majority of people, because their freedoms as individuals, their integrities as communities, respect for the law and equality before the law came after so many centuries of struggle. And regrettably, many of us Muslims do not appreciate that this was a very important accomplishment in the history of Europe. People paid with their blood in the American Revolution, in the French Revolution, in order for the present liberal democratic systems to prevail and for people to feel secure under these regimes. Although now George Bush and Tony Blair are doing away with much of these accomplishments, but nevertheless, we have to say that this is a fact of history. Now, we Muslims, we have something called ijtihad, which is a process through which scholars, specialists in the field, knowledgeable in the Quran, our main frame of reference, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the traditions and the sayings of the Prophet as a second source of reference. They consider a situation that is unprecedented, that is new, and come up with a verdict. This is what ijtihad is about. And in political theory, the Islamic political theory, much of what is in our classical writings, classical books, is a product of ijtihad. In other words, what you read in Al-Mawardi's Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniya, or Ibn Taymiyyah's Al-Siyas al-Shari'iyya, or in the writings of other writings of Ibn Taymiyyah, or the writings of Ibn Khaldun, or earlier scholars like Al-Ghazali, or even Abu Yusuf or Abu Hanifa before, much of what has to do with how the affairs of the community is run is the product of the ijtihad of that moment, on the basis of absolute principles that are brief, that are collective, and that are to be found in the Quran and the Sunnah. One interesting example, you stop me whenever you think I've approached the red line. One of the interesting examples is that the perception of the other in Islamic history had very much to do with the perception of the other of the Muslims. Unlike what some Muslims think today, oh, these are the Christians and the Jews, and therefore the Quran says so and so. It was never like this in the history of Islam. The Christians and the Jews, the Hindus, the Buddhists, the atheists, whoever they were, even Muslim sects from within Islam itself, like the various Shiite sects, like even the Sunni theological sects, the Mu'tazilites, whatever. The way they were perceived is the way they perceive the other. And therefore, part of making the ijtihad has to be this sort of perception. So a practical example is how Islamic jurists, the fuqaha, disagreed on how the Muslims should be dealing with the Christians of Cyprus. You know, when Cyprus was conquered by the Muslims, there were 7 different opinions. And these 7 different opinions were based on how each school of thought or each leading scholar perceived the Christians of Cyprus. So we take from one extreme that saw them as a 5th column, working for the Romans, and therefore they are always a potential threat and you have to deal with them like this. To the other extreme of considering them to be a credit. They are Christians, they live with us, and they can be an excellent bridge for us to understand and to communicate with the Romans. And therefore, Islamic political thought and Islamic thinking is part of a process that is born of its time. Now, what happened when this huge, beautiful castle, palace, paradise that the early Muslims built collapsed? What happened? We turned into people in the open. We became vulnerable. We were looking for our glory and finding it nowhere but in the books of history. And unfortunately, when some leading scholars like Rifa' al-Tahtawi and Khairuddin al-Tunisi started appreciating the democratic experience of Europe, that came at a very wrong time. At a very wrong time, because, as you heard probably Professor Masiri say yesterday, the democratic countries of Europe were colonizing the Muslim lands. So when you have scholars saying, oh, France is beautiful, they have democracy. Oh, what are you talking about? The Democrats of France are destroying the houses of our Algerian brothers and sisters, something like this. So it was not the best time for seeing what Europe has achieved. And we've been in this since long, actually. And that explains the attitude of scholars, the attitude of activists. It's really how I perceive the other, because how the other, on the basis of how the other is reacting to me. It's a long story that I usually tell in several lectures as part of my intensive course, but to come to a conclusion, I'd say, on the basis of a new ijtihad, for a situation unprecedented in our history before, where today we have Muslim minorities living in majority non-Muslim societies, it becomes incumbent upon us to think of this new situation and see how are we going to deal with it. And I do have all sympathy, and we have to have understanding for brothers who are slow in realizing this. we have to be compassionate. We have to, I mean, I remember in the early 90s, all these fights with some brothers from other groups who were opposed to my notion of power sharing and praising democracy, etc. But now I understand that it's not easy. We have a long legacy, we have a long tradition of rejecting, of not having the sort of problems that we have today. And therefore, it is incumbent upon scholars to come up with a new ijtihad in order to deal with the situation. And alhamdulillah, today I can say that we have some excellent works. Some of the work is by scholars who have been living in Europe and know Europe very well, or scholars who have been visiting Europe regularly and know the situation and are talking about it. In conclusion, participating in a non-Islamic political order is not haram. There is, so long as it does, that is, it's not forbidden from an Islamic perspective, so long as you are not forced to concede the fundamentals of your deen. And there is no democracy today that tells us before you participate you have to do this and do that. And even if they do that, we reject that. And like in France, we refuse to accept a ban on the headscarf, for instance, and we would encourage people to struggle against it. It's a basic freedom, and it's a fundamental in Islam. Muslim women who want to cover their heads, that's their right. They worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by doing that. Now, if there are other examples, we will deal with them. This is just a small example. And therefore, our best interests, on the basis of the various rules of jurisprudence, قواعد الفقهية المتعددة, it is in our best interests to participate, to be involved, so that others don't decide for us on our behalf. If we do not participate and if we do not act, the likes of Louise Illman, the likes of all these right-wingers and the Zionists in this country will eventually get away with even driving us out of the country. And Melanie Phillips said it the other day, that we the Muslims, we have something inherent within us, that we are ideologically opposed to the others, and that there is no other solution but to get us out of this country, out of Europe. Therefore, we have to participate, we have to join forces with others, and my sister and my brother have spoken a lot about this. The best model we have set for this country is our alliance with the left movement. You heard us earlier talk about this. Thank you very much.
We'll take a round of questions. So if you can put your hands up, please, so I can point out any questions. Anybody else? 2, 3. Can you have the mic, roaming mic? Oh, we got the roaming mic. No. No. Can you have a roaming mic? Just 1 minute, please. Great. Can you have go the right to back there, then one in front, and there was a sister. Okay, start from the middle, doesn't it? Yeah. Sister there. Yeah.
Thank you. My question is actually for those who organised this particular discussion panel. So I was wondering whether any mainstream non-Muslim politicians had shown an interest in being involved in this discussion, or had been invited, because I think that would have been sort of even more interesting.
Right. I had a question really that, for example, I attended a Tupi march a few years ago, but on that occasion I remember saying group participants saying don't go to this march, etc. They're still quite active. I personally see leaflets for them at most mosques, and I think one of the problems is a kind of fragmentation of different groups that don't agree with each other. And I have to admit I'm a bit envious of, say, organisations that are very sort of Zionists who seem to be very united in their stance on getting their views and point across. I suppose my question is how we can achieve the same sort of unification within Muslim youth and Muslims generally.
Far in the hand.
This is the front page story. It would be inconceivable that they would have run a front page story.
Marcus Garvey said, persons without knowledge of his history, religion and concept, like the without its roots, and the bird said for evil to prevail over advise them to remain silent. Whilst my heart bleeds and my eyes shed tears when I was believing that you were quite right, one of the key things you're missing about civil participation in society is the number of public appointments that lie vacant, and the Muslims are fulfilling them, whether that's on the local police authority, private care trust, non-exec from the NHS, or even the postal service. I think Muslims need to participate at this level. This is where the real decision making happens and policy decisions are made. Whilst I have reservations about political participation, I can only name two politicians that I've recently seen in the last couple of days, Shahid Malik and Khalid Mahmood. They're the epitome of representing Muslims. But I think until these types of individuals are exposed and the mainstream political parties are told not to clip the wings of Muslims, Muslims will never participate. And I can empathise with the final speaker that Muslims have got a long way to come in terms of maturity. But the likes of Shahid Malik and Khalid Mahmood don't confuse us. And these political frameworks that clip the wings of Muslims, I don't know how respected in terms of tolerating Muslim views, but if there was an alternative vehicle that Muslims could stand on and utilise to share their views without feeling that they have to conform to please Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, especially in a particular political party, and completely much better. So these are the concerns I have, that we're not working hard enough to expose these political frameworks that tries to clip the wings of Muslims and try and set up a vehicle where we can have political participation without being labelled extremist or carrying certain views around injustice and intolerance. And I thank the speakers, the Nobel Prize, Lord Nazir and thank you very much. Very much.
Whatever is about the story of Palestine.
So, I'd like to being one of the directors of Expo, why
Before I'll come to that, but just to clarify a point that may have been a little bit ambiguous in what I or someone may have said. When I said that society now is divided into margins, and I said the margins on the Muslim side and the margins on the non-Muslim side, I was talking about those who said it's no good, taking part in politics. The best way to go is to basically either eliminate the other, eradicate the other, kill the other, or the such. And those are, and I gave the example of being either the minute proportion of the extremists on the Muslim side, or the BNP and their likes. I, like Selma, I'm also proud to be a member of Respect, which has seemed to be a marginal group, although I go to Newham in East London, and it's anything but. But coming back to the question, I can only raise my hand and say that I don't know why it is that a non-Muslim mainstream politician wasn't invited. I think it would have been a good contribution to hear. Yeah. It's.
Absolutely. Excuse me, I thought they were invited, that's why I came. But they wouldn't come, you're right. They don't have the guts to come. That man is absolutely right.
The minister withdrew last minute.
They don't have the guts.
The minister that was supposed to be in the opening, she withdrew last minute.
It's. I think, and this is something I think that adds to the overwhelming success, by the grace of Allah, of this particular event. That I'm pretty sure that most of you have been following the news the past week or so. Dr. Azzam Tamimi on my right, as well as others who we have invited, amongst whom Sheikh Al-Haq, who's coming today, I believe, will speak this afternoon, were attacked, in a quite ferocious and typically, unfair and inhumane manner by various publications. However, here we have Azzam Tamimi speaking almost every day, a number of times. And the event has gone as an incredible success. In fact, if anything, those attacks seem to have been some sort of promotion that we didn't pay for by the likes of the Evening Standard, the Daily Mail, or the Sun. But coming back to the issue, we were supposed to be joined by Lord Nazir Ahmed and Sadiq Khan. both of whom are obviously from the Labour Party. I cannot. The only thing I know that Sadiq Khan called this morning to say that he had a personal family engagement. He was at the launch of the Islamic Expo, but he couldn't come today. We heard nothing of Lord Nazir Ahmed. I'm presuming, as a Muslim, I'm presuming that he was held up by something. But I would suggest, and without having, on my personal behalf, having made any kind of effort on this particular front, I would have thought that any kind of invitation to mainstream Labour or possibly even Conservative politicians would have basically gone either unanswered or with a straight no. It's unfortunate, but I hope that in future events that will be the situation.
I think there's consensus almost in this room that we do need participation at all levels in civil society. And I think, yes, it would make a difference. Because I'll just give you one small example. I'm one person out of 120 councillors in Birmingham. In our first full council meeting, I asked the leadership, how many ethnic minority councillors are there in the cabinet, because there aren't any, and how many women, because only one. So an issue of inequality. At the time, I was told by the leader I should go and represent Burnley or Oldham, and I was being divisive for even asking this, right? But the next day, there was such a media story that the leader was forced to apologise to me, and now they have appointed the first Asian Muslim lead authority member on the West Midlands Police Authority. So they'll never admit that they kind of got wrong in the first place, because they still think it's divisive to talk about it. But yes, if you're not there, you're not going to affect a change. So I think even if there's only a few of you, you can actually make a disproportionate impact. But at the same time, we are facing, following Stephen Lawrence, we would have hoped that certain things would have changed. But there's discrimination, not just against Muslims, but against ethnic minorities, which we have to unite and have a battle, the new anti-racism battle. Because people are now saying multiculturalism is dead, it's failed, we have 7-7. Because everything is being politicised, everything is being distorted through 7-7. So even some of the victories that were hard won a few years ago, we're having to regain that ground now. So there is a big battle ahead, and we have to be real and alive to that.
Several points that were made there. One was of unity and how he really looks at the society and feels that they're united, whereas Muslims are not. Maybe you could throw light on both of them.
Well, I want to say that let's not imprison ourselves with the notion of unity, because we can never achieve unity. But let's talk about those who agree with each other coming together. Because Muslims in this country are so diverse, and there's all sorts of levels of understanding, of interest. There will always be people who are self-interested. They're after their own interests, and they don't give a damn about the ummah or the community. So I would say, rather than ache over this and say, when are we going to be united? When are we going to be one voice? Let's make a voice. Let's make a unity of some sort out of this diversity that works together in the hope of making a better representation for what the Muslims stand for.
One more round and then we'll end. So I need 3 more hands. And then there, and then
I can say I have changed. I didn't vote Labour this year, I voted Respect. And my view of change, I think educated people are changing, and I've always voted, as I said, Labour in the past. Only in lifetime, in the last 46 years I've lived in this country, once I voted Conservative, but my view have changed completely. I think I have written to my MP, I support Palestinian cause, what Blair's foreign policies have taken so many innocent lives. I entirely blame the British government, what they have done, but we must stick together. I think the people who have come in here to attend this Islam Expo for the last 4 days should all join together and support every cause which is against Islam, against humanity, and against all of us. We must stick together, and I think we can change. We can make a change if we stick together.
Thank you for the description of myself. I have a question for the panel regarding Islam's British Muslims' alliance with the left. I think that it's very good because the left, traditional left, and British Muslims have these shared values of social justice. But I have this fear, and perhaps our speakers could address this and put it in a proper perspective, that amongst the left, there are two sort of like sects, if you can, as a shorthand of speech. There are the left who believe in social justice, in sort of like, okay, there's equality, you can believe what you want to believe, we respect you for your difference, but we work on our shared values, which is, I mean, the paramount shared values is of one of social justice. But on the other side of the left, you have the left who foresee a development of society that moves away from religion. That religion will one day be a non-issue in politics and in public life and whatnot. So I fear that there would be a backlash, which is not happening yet, but with the right you have already seen it. People who are right of centre have moved away from the Tories and have supported the likes of UKIP and BNP. Is there such a fear that such splinter groups from the left will move away from left of centre and set up, you know, a similar things like the UKIP and BNP?
You know, your Salma presentation is fantastic, but the way you criticize like Shaheen or Sadiq or whatever, I think it's, I don't know, I might misunderstood. It was like, my placard of what you said about like you, sorry? No, whatever, you know, it's about disagreement about some Muslim. No, anyway, the way to express the disagreement, not to shut it down. So they might believe what they say, might be wrong, like support Iran or whatever, but the way to build, like, you know, like, should like criticize them in a better way. Second thing is about the expressing the grievances of Muslims. I agree with you, that's legitimate. But how you address it, it could be like in different ways, because it could be like incite people to make violence, it could be build people, motivate people to participate in the community. So the way to address it, not the grievance itself, you can do it, but how you address it is different, because the four Muslim people who, like, you know, like make the bomb or whatever, they got some incitement from like grievances, how they express it. So how can you challenge that? This is the most important thing, not to how you address it. The third point is the Muslims, to help their cause, they should go beyond the Muslim concerns and to engage with non-Muslim issues in order to gain the support of non-Muslim people. Otherwise, the Muslim will be in a corner, focus on Muslim issues, but should go beyond that in order to gain the support.
One question. Fear of alliance with the left. She talks about political alliance, but there is a liberal morality that is a question here as well. If you can touch on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. As somebody who's obviously been working with the left the last few years, I was criticised by Muslims for being the sellout, and I've had death threats. The brother standing outside the mosque telling me kids' head to be chopped off, literally. And elections, you know, they were saying she's a kafir because she's running for election. And there were some people on the left, especially at the beginning of the anti-war movement, who said this is an unholy alliance. If you read people like Nick Cohen, who consider themselves on the left, they're very anti-religious. What's happened is, people like that have been marginalised, and that's why they can't stand us, because actually we won the argument. And just as in Islam, certain Muslims fall into different categories and there's competing viewpoints, the same in the left. There is a broad agreement on some issues, but there will be some disagreements, especially around the nature of secularism. There are some secularists who are very much for tolerating different religious points of view. That's how they express their secularism. And there are some secularists who I call very extreme, like the example of France, where they are virulently against any religious expression. But I would say the dominant left expression that we have in this country is more of the tolerant secularism. As long as we engage in that, and we are shaping that as well by participating in it, I'm very confident that any splinter group, whether it's now or in the future, will not have much sway. But that is dependent on how we interact and how we, and just for example, one last example of that is the European Social Forum, and held in France. When I went there, I was speaking about the war, not about hijab, but the audience and the people who were on the panel were literally banging their hands saying, how dare she come here with a scarf on, this oppressed and oppressive Muslim woman, speak to us. Yet when we had the ESF, I think the same room here, we talked about hijab, we had overwhelming support from non-Muslims about our right to wear it, as well as the right, of course, for Muslim women not to wear it. So it shows that it's not necessarily always one way or another, and I'm going to tie my answer with the answer about the unity, because it's a myth to have everybody agreeing on one idea. I think for me the more interesting thing is the process of engaging different ideas and winning the argument with as large a number of people as possible. I think that's what we're doing here today.
Very briefly, I agree with what Selma has just said, and I think that that is basically the problem that you cited, is even a greater incentive for Muslims to try to strengthen that alliance, because I'm not sure, but I think the three of us have spoken or are going to speak at something else that's happening throughout London today, and that's as Marxism 2006. I spoke yesterday, as Dan was speaking tomorrow, and Selma, you spoke, I believe. So basically, I mean, the Muslims are now at the heart of events held by the left, and Selma is right. The argument amongst the left itself, as we talk about the Muslim community, they are diverse and they are different and they have their variable levels of interest and understanding of stuff. We should also assume the same of the others. Our presence there helps win the argument for those who are now leading the left. And it's important that the likes of Nick Cohen and David Aronovich and others are marginalized within the left. And there are the Zionist elements within the left. There are the fanatical, extreme, secularists and non-religious and such within the left. But those are being marginalized more and more. One of the reasons why, because we are there. And we have to continue to be there. And I think that unless we see, and yesterday there was a very, very wonderful seminar in which Dr. Azam took part in, about the Muslim and the left, in which we had three wonderful speakers from our friends from the left, from the Mayor's Office, Andrew Murray from Stop Law Coalition, and Jeremy Corbyn, the MP for Islington North. And it was a wonderful debate about how Muslims and the left have been working together, are currently working together, and what they can do in the future together, appreciating each other's differences.
Unfortunately, I have to bring a stop to yet another great session at Islam Expo. I hope you have a great time for the rest of the day. I would just like to remind the delegates that we will have a final ending conclusion session at about 4 o'clock in this room. And actually the final concluding remarks for the whole Islam Expo. But for the rest of the day, look at your itinerary, and I hope you enjoy the day. Jazakallah khair.